I wanted to ask you, Brian, we now know that Donald Trump is choosing people like Marco Rubio potentially for Secretary of State. We actually just got reports that there is now a new Secretary of Defense in the United States. He is a Fox News host who is, let's just say, an Iran and China hawk. He has been filling out his cabinet, national security advisors, China hawks, Mike Waltz, for example. Talk about your impression of these picks, because there was a lot of enthusiasm, I think, for people who follow geopolitics around, our audiences and around the election of Donald Trump. But Pete Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense. He is an Iran hawk. He calls it an evil regime. He is a China hawk. Anyone that is being picked by by Donald Trump right now seems to fit this pattern. What's your impression?
Yeah, literally every single person he has picked so far has, maybe with the exception of Elon Musk, maybe I'll get into that in just a bit. And his position is, I mean, I don't even know what this position that was created for him. And you know what Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., you know what they are. They are the sugar coating of this giant lump of arsenic that they're asking the American people to choke down. That's all they are, because literally everyone else who has orbited Trump during his campaign and now getting positions in his administration, these are all neocon war hawks. You remember Donald Trump Jr., no neocons or war hawks. We went from no neocons and war hawks to all neocons and war hawks. And forgive me for not being surprised, but this is literally what he did during his first administration. I tried to warn people then, because I actually looked at the people who surrounded him. I understand where real power stems from. It stems from money and guns. And in the United States, there is no alternative center of power with enough money and guns to make any meaningful change in American politics. It's a fact. It cannot happen. You cannot create something out of nothing. And even though the American people want this, they don't have the means to actually do it. And because Americans, like all human beings, including myself, we're capable of logic and reason, but ultimately we're emotional creatures. So people are going to invest their hope in Trump because Trump promised them this. He promised them an anti-war campaign to divest from American imperialism abroad and invest in America. That is sound. That is something I would love to see. That is something I wish I could believe in and see unfold. But it just was never going to. He was just telling you what you want to hear so that he could get the support of war-weary Americans. And then once he's in office, he's going to go and do whatever he feels like, just like he did the first time. He is a politician, and he's doing exactly what politicians always do, almost without exception. I don't know why people thought he was the exception, especially since he already spent 4 years betraying his campaign promises and the core of his movement and the people he has surrounded himself with. The new U.S. ambassador to the UN, Elias Stefanik, board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy, this regime change organization that spreads democracy all around the globe. A lot of the cultural war nonsense that right-wing conservatives detest, this is what the NED is promoting all around the world. And Stefanik plays a key role as a member of the board of directors in doing that all around the globe. You have John Radcliffe, CIA director. Every single malicious fabricated lie about China, he will repeat it. So will Mike Waltz, who I think it is confirmed that he will now be the national security advisor. People were saying Trump didn't pick Bolton, he didn't pick Pompeo, he didn't pick Haley. Instead, he picked their ideological clones, which are these people. Mike Waltz is the idea. Tell me, how is he different than John Bolton? How is Marco Rubio different than Mike Pompeo? How is Elias Stefanik different than Nikki Haley, except in name? I mean, some of them actually almost look identical in appearance. So there is no change coming. They need to kick the can down the road. They need to create doubts and hesitation in the minds of Americans so that they don't try to actually change anything in the US. And they'll go ahead and they'll advance this agenda. I heard people talk about Vivek Ramaswamy. This guy is an anti-war. He's an anti-China war hawk. I'm sorry, anti-China war hawk. I'm just looking down the list. It's unbelievable. And the problem is, going back to humans being emotional creatures, they would rather become liars themselves than admit that they have been lied to. So as I'm debating with people about this who try to make excuses, I see them adopting lies that I know they oppose, but they don't want to admit that they've been tricked. They don't want to admit that this hope was an illusion. They rather be shaped into bad people than admit people they thought were good have actually turned out to be very bad. So you will see Trump supporters who picked Trump specifically because he said he would stop wars abroad, repeating lies about China, about Iran, because they don't want to admit that Trump has instantly, at light speed at least, betrayed his campaign promises. And so, yes, it's just going to get worse. And for people who are making excuses or who are trying to convince themselves that this is not exactly what it looks like, especially after 4 years of this already, I honestly don't know what else to say. What I will say, though, is it was a good sign that people overwhelmingly voted for Trump, because that is a rejection of status quo, although Trump is status quo, just repackaged. The other thing that I will say is if you want to see a change in U.S. American foreign or even domestic policy, it's going to happen because the multipolar world creates an environment in which change in the United States is impossible. The type of foreign policy the U.S. wants to pursue abroad will be made impossible by the multipolar world, creating an environment where U.S. wars abroad are no longer possible. There's significant, sufficient military deterrence against U.S. wars and proxy wars. Securing the information space across the multipolar world, denying the U.S. dominion over it, especially with all these U.S.-based social media platforms, media organizations, putting a check on that and displacing that from the information space around the globe. Things like this. This is what will constrain and stop U.S. foreign policy. I have no hope at all that it will ever change internally in the United States. Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. And I think, for me, it's people are going to have to create and demand something much better than a Donald Trump or any kind of alternative in the establishment, or an alternative posing as an alternative in the establishment, because you're not going to get in the duopoly, in the two-party system, which is absolutely controlled by wealth, by capital, by money, by the rich, and by, of course, the military interests and the warmongers that do their bidding. You're not going to get change out of that. And what's so interesting, Brian, I don't know if you caught the enthusiasm that was so apparent on social media after Donald Trump publicly announced he was not going to invite Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo back into his administration. There was almost a kind of gleeful celebration that was going on among those who were following this. But of course, this was very premature, because it almost seems like now that move was just a way to soften the blow of choosing someone possibly like Marco Rubio, who some people have tried to quibble with me. Oh, Marco Rubio versus Mike Pompeo. Oh, who's worse? Maybe Mike Pompeo is a little worse. I'm just like, do you know Marco Rubio? Marco Rubio he is being groomed by the Adelsons, who are the big money donor to Donald Trump, around getting him to be very friendly to Israel. That has been the case for the past two political administrations for Donald Trump. Marco Rubio is being groomed by them to be president, but this guy is connected to everything, whether it is through trying to support and literally supporting every single coup attempt in Latin America, to wanting war with Iran, to, of course, also being a fanatic China hawk, a fanatic. All of these choices so far are fanatics when it comes to China. They are China hawks through and through. Even the Western media calls them China hawks because that's just what they are. And that's what you can expect. You can expect now. I don't even know if it's going to be a reprioritization, Brian. I don't know, because the Ukraine conflict cannot be left, right? Like, you can't just do nothing about it. You have to do something about it. And it's unclear whether Russia is going to say, well, all right, if you want to ignore this, then we're just going to hold back. No, that politically, it doesn't seem possible for NATO and the United States to necessarily just ignore it. They're going to have to make decisions about it, which means that they're going to have to be involved if these China hawks and these Iran hawks in Trump's upcoming cabinet are going to get their way. They're going to have to do all three fronts, Brian.
Yes, well, this is the problem, and let's just all be honest. The United States holding primacy over the rest of the planet is unrealistic. It is an absolute fantasy detached from reality. It cannot be achieved. And people pursuing a policy like this, they're just going to do increasingly desperate things to achieve something that is unachievable. And when I say desperate, I also mean the more desperate you become, the more dangerous the things you do become. So there is that threat. We're looking at Israel. The one thing that differentiates Israel from Ukraine is that it is supposedly armed with nuclear weapons. If there's a window of opportunity closing to use conventional military means, or maybe the window is already closed against Iran, reassert American primacy over the region, there is this temptation to have Israel use nuclear weapons against Iran, devastate its economic infrastructure, its ballistic missile production, a number of things to just cripple and set Iran back. Maybe not even defeat it, but just set it back enough so the U.S. can reassert control over the region. There is a temptation to do that. And the U.S. can say, well, just like with steamrolling Gaza, we told them to show restraint. They just did whatever they wanted to do, even though the U.S. has enabled every single aspect of everything Israel does. So there's that danger. There's the same danger of someone overplaying their hand in Ukraine and direct conflict erupting between Russia and NATO. And for the United States, its presence in NATO versus Russia is located in Europe. So if missiles start to fly, who's going to suffer? Is it going to be the continental United States? No, it will be Europe. Same goes for Asia Pacific. It'll be South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and the island province of Taiwan that absorb the full brunt of any conflict that takes place there. So from America's point of view, the ruling elite, the special interests driving these desperate and dangerous foreign policies, they feel decoupled from the consequences of their actions, including the most desperate and dangerous actions. That is where the real danger lies here. And you can see people criticize Russia, China, and Iran for their patience and their restraint. But that is because I believe they are well aware of this danger. And they are just trying to time out the clock before something dangerous, desperate, and dangerous is done by the United States. Now, I forget what was the other point you were asking about, Danny.
No, that's okay. Well, I mean, it's good that we're talking about all three of these fronts at the same time, to be honest, Brian, because I think this is where, and we've been trying to draw in this thread throughout the conversation, this is where a lot of people are getting hung up. Just because Donald Trump, for example, says positive things on Ukraine, for example, like, I'm going to end it in 24 hours. Pretty ridiculous. And the plans, and maybe you want to talk about this too, what he even put out there, what has been rumored to be put out there as a possible settlement, pretty insulting to Russia. Even the rumored phone call we haven't even gotten to, where it was said that, Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin. Dmitry Peskov, Russia's spokesperson, said absolutely not. That did not happen. But even what was supposedly said on that phone call is an insult to Russia. To me, doesn't even signal any progress, because what is reportedly being said, Brian, is that he basically told Putin, you better de-escalate. We need to talk about how to we need to talk about Europe and how we're going to protect Europe from you almost. And that just seemed to be what a ridiculous approach to any kind of conversation, and one that didn't even happen. So we have, I think, a lot of, even in the lead up to Trump's new administration, a lot of fog of war, but also just the reality that just because Donald Trump says he's going to close out the Ukraine conflict does not mean that the U.S. foreign policy establishment is not going to get theirs. There's obviously a concerted effort here. And I do believe, and I'm curious in your thoughts on this too, Brian, I do believe a lot of this is in part an attempt to stabilize the situation. Ukraine is a disaster. If it keeps going on in this way, NATO will be a shell of itself. It already is. Ukraine will essentially cease to exist. And the weapon of choice economically for the U.S. and its vassals, sanctions, have already been delegitimized. Those can't even last in and of themselves. They're essentially completely defeated in many respects. So there is a need, and of course, Gaza, the Middle East, just an absolute disaster. No victory. There was no victory there before October 7, 2023. This October 7, 2023 only led to a further, in my opinion, just a complete and utter quagmire for the U.S. So I believe that there's some attempts to balance off these fronts through someone like Trump. But I think the big sights here is, okay, if Ukraine has been the big focus, especially monetarily, for so long, well, let's now split between Iran and China. If we diminish a bit of what Ukraine is getting, then we should look at Iran and China, because first of all, Israel is in big trouble, and China is the real big enchilada.
Yes. Well, again, as I was pointing out before, even before the election, the U.S. was talking about how their stockpiles are exhausted. There's no more support. Attempts to expand military industrial production to cover the disparity between what is being provided to Ukraine and what the Russian military has available to that has all failed. That never materialized. And so there was always going to be I like what you said, Danny, they have to stabilize what is happening in Ukraine. They have to somehow freeze the conflict, or at least create some sort of standoff of some kind. Because again, the clock is ticking. Every year, China gets stronger. Every year, Iran is getting stronger. We can see, despite their best efforts, even Russia is getting stronger. The multipolar world, to shift the balance of power from the collective West to the rest of the world, every single year that goes by, that increases. And so they're running out of time, and they're trying to reassert primacy everywhere. And now they're forced to pick and choose. We remember them saying the United States military has to be ready to fight on 2 or 3 fronts. They're lucky if they can fight on even just one front now. We can see the limits. I also like what you said about Israel and the shift in the balance of power in the Middle East there. That goes back well beyond October 7th. This operation, which I think I have different views on that than many people do, especially considering the history and the role Hamas has played versus Iran, Syria, Russia in the region. But if you followed, say, the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Israel's inability to achieve any of its goals there, you could already see a shift taking place. The military superiority that the West enjoyed for so long was already at that time shifting in the other direction, and it has only done more so since. And so this is what they're racing against. This is what they're trying to maybe in a way catch up with, and they just simply can't. And they're so convinced of their inherent superiority, they can't imagine that it's just impossible for them to do this, so they will not give up. And if you listen to a lot of the arguments made by why are we antagonizing China? What did China actually do to the United States? Nothing. All they've done is outcompete and begin surpassing the United States. How is that China's fault? How does that justify confronting China militarily off their own coast on the other side of the planet? It really just doesn't make any sense unless we're going to look at the truth frankly and see that it is about modern day imperialism and a delusional empire that refuses to give up its grip on power across the globe. And actually, it's nothing new. This is what empires have done all throughout history, and now we're living through this cycle turning over once again.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.